We're now live. This is the joint fiscal committee. It's Tuesday, February 27th. And we have a very tight agenda here. We have to wrap up at 1:30. So our first item is to approve the minutes from our December 1st meeting. It's an action item and would entertain a motion.
I so move.
Second, further discussion? Otherwise, we don't have to call the roll on that. We can just vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? The next item is this to get an update on the housing transitions. We had given this committee the oversight responsibility for how we're progressing with Act 81 and bringing on more housing capacity. And so we have a long list of people from the administration to update us on the efforts to date. And so I would like to invite Todd Delos, who's the Deputy Secretary at the Agency of Human Services, and Secretary Curley from ACCD. And then we will just have staff from the departments within the agencies speak. We move forward on the agenda. So this is obviously one of the things that we did in the act was really say, this is a all hands on deck. There was a lot of discussion about this isn't just a state effort and tied into communities, community organizations. So we're at this point looking forward to the update on the progress that has been made, knowing that this is a very large challenge and one that is not unique to Vermont in terms of what we have for pressure on emergency housing and the fact that temporary permanent housing is in short supply as well. So thank you for being here, and I will let you take it from here. And I guess probably the Deputy Secretary's got the pleasure of starting first. Have your voice back today.
It is back enough, Senator. Thank you. And thanks for being here or inviting us here for this opportunity. Todd Delos, I'm the Deputy Secretary of the Agency of Human Services. Getting over a cold, no longer presenting too much. So apologies for my voice. As the Senator suggested, there has been significant work in the 8 months since Act 81 and Act 78 were passed by this body. With a lot of collaboration, a lot of partnerships with the community. And in that work, as we will demonstrate with a couple of different witnesses, a real all hands on deck effort from the various partners within the community. I know some folks are here today as well as efforts across the Agency of Human Services, connecting as well with other agencies in the state. Through that work, focused on the June 30th cohort, over 700 households have exited the cohort in those 8 months, many finding alternative housing or other options through that collaborative work. I pause because I think it's really important to note that of course leaves over 500 households still in the cohort, still in emergency shelters, still in our hotel motel program. And fundamentally, the challenge that we face in moving them forward is a problem of where they can go. And that in turn is a problem of the generation. So I will go forward with the testimony from AHS in a minute, but I want to give Secretary Curley a chance to address some of the unit generation work, which we see as the fundamental element to addressing this shelter housing problem.
Thank you. For the record, I'm Lindsay Curley.
That's a VPR mic, not a.
Oh, that's great. Good. Awesome. For the record, I'm Lindsay Curley. I'm the Secretary of the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. And thank you. It's nice to be here with the Deputy Secretary. We're actually neighbors, fun fact. So we don't get to do this together often. So I just want to, I know I don't need to remind the committee, but, just remind you of the urgency of, our need for unit generation. And, it took me quite a while for this to really sink in, but, we need permanent solutions. We need units. We need to house people. And you'll hear from AHS about, again, as the deputy secretary talked about what they're doing to try to, talking about the problem, addressing the problem that we have right now. And then you'll hear from Commissioner Farrell from the Department of Housing and Community Development about, what we are proposing to do so that we're not talking about this same problem 5 years from now. So you'll hear more detail from both partnerships as we go forward. But again, this is something we've been trying to address for several years now. As you know, we've spent a lot of money, and now we have a proposal to really try to get folks from both public and private sides to invest in generating housing units. And so again, it's a multi-pronged approach. And I just wanted to take an opportunity to really make a plea to all of you to help us get real positive policy change over the finish line so that we can generate these at least 5,000 units a year that we need to bring online so that folks have permanent solutions that are really healthy for them so we can have a healthy housing market. So with that, I'll go back to the deputy secretary. As I mentioned, we're going to kind of keep going back and forth and bringing some of our experts up as well throughout the testimony.
Yes.
Just, go ahead. I know that there's various estimates, the number of units we need, but holding that 5,000 units that you were describing was that per year?
Per year, yes.
And do you have a plan to get to 5,000 units per year?
We have a plan. We know that our plan, there are so many environmental and economical things that happen in our environment that we can't control.
Absolutely.
So we put forth a plan that includes a variety of different policy changes, land use, regulatory, there's some financial investment. And I know Commissioner Farrell has been testifying on it, and he will talk a bit more about that as well, that we feel confident will make a real dent in this. Can I sit here today and tell you that it's going to fix everything? Absolutely not. I hope it will, but there are atmospheric changes. There are things that would have to happen to really get that to move us over the number. So I guess as a base, what we've proposed, we think will make a significant impact, but we need that and more, so to speak. But we feel confident that it would make significant improvement. Again, it's hard to know. Interest rates change, the economy changes, right? There's a whole host. So I wouldn't want to sit here today and say, absolutely, we feel it's a slam dunk, but we feel good about it. And again, we've done internal tools and modeling to try to figure out how if we gained, 10% increases based on certain changes, policy changes that would happen, where it would potentially add, whether it be new growth or revitalizing rundown stock. So I don't know if you've had an opportunity to hear more about that, but again, we have plans and we're happy to share those with you.
I can ask
Yeah.
Farrell about the difference between dense and 5,000 when he comes on.
Yes, absolutely. And he did bring data with him, slides that have data. So you'll see more on that as well.
Rep Wood, sorry.
That's okay. I can't hear or speak today. So. Good morning. Thank you both for being here. I'm just curious if you can tell me, out of those 5,000 units, more or less per year, how many of those are dedicated for people with very low incomes? So essentially folks living on SSI or SSDI.
I don't have that information right in front of me. I'm not sure how far into the detail Commissioner Farrell will have, but if you're okay with holding the question until he gets up here, he will either be able to answer it or let you know that he doesn't have that information. But
He's heard me ask it before. So.
okay. So thank you for the question.
We're struggling with two things, one of which is the short term, because obviously bringing on units, whatever in the thousands it takes time. And then, and how do we see that moving forward? And so we can get the details, but the question ultimately becomes, when we're looking at this, what progress we have in terms of other activities, including this will get into your negotiations with the hotels and the motels that have been sort of the default in the absence of other housing. Although I think it's important to note, there are people that are unhoused now. We are not at 100%, and we know that. And I guess most cities and states are not there. So we're talking about the numbers here, but I don't think anyone is saying that we have a situation right now. Maybe we did back in COVID to some extent, but not now. So I guess other questions of Secretary Curley at this point, it sounds like the commissioner will be able to give us more specific numbers. So sorry.
Just real quickly, your first chart has 1,700 that are now in the program, 1,700 households. Am I reading this right?
I'm sorry, which chart are you looking at?
Right here.
Households by
We're back.
district?
Okay,
And this is the agency's data, so I think we're gonna have to, as it relates to the GA program, so I guess we'll have to go to
Okay, and what was
back to
it,
AHS.
if we went back to a year ago this time, how many was it?
So if we're looking at slide 2, and I'm happy to respond to this or have Deputy Commissioner Gray come up who has more in-depth knowledge, but Representative Harrison, I think the question is sort of where are we compared to last year? So effectively, and just reserving the fact that Deputy Commissioner Gray is going to actually have the specific numbers, we're around 1,250 households in the June cohort total. So as of June 30th,
Pretty good increase, is fair to say?
yes, though this 1,700 number is not simply the June cohort.
No,
It is both the June cohort and individuals who are in the GA emergency program. So they came in under other eligibility criteria, predominantly the adverse weather conditions policy that kicked in December and will end, the date to date will end on March 15th and the overall adverse weather conditions policy will end on April 15th. So it is an increase, but it's not quite apples to apples, unfortunately. So if I can, Senator, I'll just lay out very quickly for the committee kind of where we see the testimony going, of course, subject to the questions that you all have for us. We'll begin with Sue Graff, who is one of our field services directors for Springfield and Brattleboro. And Sue will talk about the all hands on deck model and how that came together, exactly how we've approached responding to the call from this committee and from the legislature to work on housing. We'll quickly pivot from there to talk a little bit about how the $10 million that was allocated has been spent out or will be allocated to support transitions and the unsheltered population. We'll look at current caseloads and shelter capacity, and that's an opportunity for Deputy Commissioner Farrell to come up and talk about unit generation, which again is the driver on this. Of course, happy to talk about the proposals that the governor has laid out and the governor's recommendation to respond to some of this. Part of that is looking at the fundamental problems that we face here, the unit generation issue, and needing to shift populations into shelters that are supportive, not just hotels and motels, which are rooms. And then, of course, happy to talk about the hotel negotiations and where that process sits. So as you wish, I will go forward. Thank you.
Why don't we go through then? Is Sue from us or she
She should be joining us
online? Okay.
your team up and I'll switch.
Why don't we bring up the
Yeah.
AHS team? And we know that different communities have responded differently to this need. So there's some variation. And we also know that the data would suggest, and I guess if you're looking at this slide, Rutland District area still seems to be where you've got a very high number of households.
Per capita.
That has been the reality right along.
And I don't know, Erin, if Sue is able to.
She's on.
Okay. Sue, can you jump in?
Thank you. Sorry, I was unsure if it was time. So thank you. Hi, I'm Sue Graff. I'm one of the AHS Field Services Directors. I serve the Brattleboro and Springfield districts. And I want to speak to the all hands on deck approach in our ongoing efforts to address housing transitions and ensure a comprehensive Community response, the Agency of Human Services has engaged in a collaborative cross-departmental approach. At the forefront of our activities, the 6 AHS field services directors, each serving 2 districts, regularly participate in regional meetings that span housing, health, and human services sectors. These team meetings are critical to ensuring that Vermonters are served well by our systems of care. They also help to identify challenges and solutions, and they intervene when unmet needs are identified, specifically around homelessness and housing. To address needs, each district facilitates a variety of critical meetings, at least monthly. They include a coordinated entry meeting, which is about homelessness specifically, housing services or a housing review team meeting, which is more of a client-based team consultation, and a housing coalition meeting, which is more of a systems level and link to unit generation or housing resources. In light of the unique challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic, our approach has adapted specific interventions for the general assistance emergency housing cohort. Our temporary case management and panel management staff have been holding team meetings and regular check-ins with partners around specific client needs. This approach comes together as a shared care plan and a comprehensive assessment, including information provided by AHS departments. AHS has taken significant steps to ensure collaboration with all key departments, including DALE, DMH, and VCCI Central Office. The collaboration involves reviewing all the pandemic cohort lists to identify clients currently engaged in Medicaid eligible or waiver programs. This review includes programs and services such as Community Rehabilitation and Treatment, or CRT, at the Department of Mental Health, Choices for Care and Traumatic Brain Injury at the Department for Disabilities, Aging, and Independent Living, and or short-term medical case management through the Vermont Chronic Care Initiative, or VCCI. Regular screening and referral processes are in place to connect all eligible or potentially eligible GA clients to the critical programs and services they may be eligible for. Also, in order to engage and leverage other resources outside of the specific 6 departments of AHS, through our housing stability policy of 2012, we expect that all AHS programs, contractors, or grantees providing case management, care coordination, or service coordination shall take into consideration the housing needs of any client served. The program or service shall include an assessment of the family's housing during intake or assessment and include housing needs in any case or care or case management plan. So to enhance the quality and capacity of our housing case management across all districts, our field services directors are championing a team-based approach. We are out in our communities, encouraging all partner organizations, especially those not primarily focused on housing, to engage, learn, and adopt this team-based approach. This strategy is designed to optimize support for the GA cohort clients to ensure that they receive the comprehensive and coordinated care they need and deserve. Our commitment to a team-based identification, engagement, and collaboration underscores AHS's dedication to meeting the housing needs of Vermonters, wherever they are.
I'm going to just break. We have a question here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
So I have seen you valiantly and tirelessly engage in all of those collaborative meetings over the last many years with a clear goal in mind. And I hear that there's a lot of process that has been in place and that's being strengthened.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious if you've seen it demonstrate any results, at least in the Brattleboro district, in the face of the significant population of folks who are unhoused.
Absolutely. And certainly I can speak to the 2 districts that I serve. So I just came out of another housing meeting in the Springfield district, and a household that's been in the program literally for 3 years is leasing up later in the week. So the collaboration between landlord liaisons, the Vermont Housing Improvement Program, units that have been prioritized for folks coming out of coordinated entry, have absolutely made a difference in our ability to place folks, at least folks that have been in the program long term. In terms of Brattleboro specifically, we benefit from having 2 different permanent supportive housing sites, the Chalet and the Great River Terrace. Again, people off of coordinated entry who are literally homeless are prioritized into those units, and we've seen an increase in those lease ups as units become available, as well as a brand new housing development, the DeWitt block on Flat Street, which had a set aside of 4 units for formerly homeless households that have been leased up as well. So there are significant, improvements and progress in terms of lease up. And for some people, the needs that they have don't necessitate living independently. That might be a service need or a connection to a treatment facility or some other skilled nursing facility, things like that. So we have seen some movement within the cohort into treatment facilities as well, or shorter term care. That's a harder, can be a harder process sometimes. But again, we're trying to ensure that eligibility is screened for, and those resource matches are made as proactively as possible with every participant in the program.
Senator Burrs.
Thank you. And I appreciate this. It's information that I didn't have before. I am a little concerned that we only have an hour, and we could easily spend much of it on this long procedural chart about how you go through your day. But what I'm worried about is the numbers that we're looking at and what the plan is going forward. So as I understand it, what you're describing has produced these numbers. I'm more interested in the numbers and what the plan would be going forward about how we would change it to house the people that are represented here as unhoused. So not to cut you off completely, but I am wondering if the testimony can be focused more on, rather than what has produced these numbers, because they leave 527 households of the cohort, but then there's an increased number otherwise. So my concerns are around the plans that I've seen in appropriations for the shelters. As I understand it, those shelters would only produce about half the beds necessary for the cohort, not to mention the rest. So I don't want us to get squeezed with 10 minutes at the end for that.
Absolutely.
And I think if you want to wrap up, obviously what we're doing is the kind of case management that we would hope would occur as a matter of service delivery. But the big problem is capacity, and it gets into the community development and the ability, because we know that shelters are oftentimes hard to site. There are a variety of different activities that need to go on in terms of that whole community relations piece. And so that we are developing those preferential alternatives to the motels, and that is varying from area to area. So maybe you could just wrap up by telling us what the experience has been in the communities in the 2 counties that you serve relative to dealing with bringing that capacity online to provide, even on the emergency or temporary basis, alternatives to motels as we're seeing it. We need to build that capacity. Obviously, it's nice to match it with what exists, but that doesn't deal with the fact that we've got a population that seems to be in greater numbers than what is out there under development or about to be developed. So if you could just give us a summary of your experience in those 2 counties, and then we'll go to the statewide.
Sure, thank you. And I know my colleagues will have more to say on this, but certainly in Brattleboro and Springfield, we've had the benefit of having some partners who are able to apply for some of the one-time funding. So the Winston Prouty Center is about to open a family shelter, which will have about 20 rooms. It will serve families and move them specifically out of the hotel program. And I know some other partners have expanded their capacity. So Springfield Supportive Housing, for instance, has been able to increase their number of emergency shelter. They use a unit scatter site approach and have both shelter units and transitional housing throughout the community. Windsor County Youth Services and others have been able to increase capacity, as has youth services, creating some more emergency apartments for shelter for youth and young adults. So we've seen the benefit of that in the reality also of a key partner, Groundworks Collaborative, needing to close a Morningside house about a year ago due to a homicide. And so the loss of 40 shelter beds or 35 shelter beds in the Brattleboro community certainly impacted our ability and relied more heavily on the hotel program in a way that was not ideal. And so they have a longer term plan to bring those shelter beds back online. But we absolutely, I was involved, the town manager of Brattleboro and myself formed a community homelessness strategy team about a year ago to really corral and bring partners together to look at capacity. We understood that we couldn't add more to the backs of the already stretched homeless service partners. And so we were looking at alternatives and models and how we might be able to leverage the letter of interest process through DCF. We did cite a potential shelter. It didn't ultimately, wasn't ultimately able to happen. And a lot of that is around staffing capacity, workforce, and other issues that are real in terms of how you provide appropriate oversight to a shelter and the guidance that certainly OEO and others provide. So I think that's a real issue. We've seen some movement again in my communities that I'm pleased to say, but know that that's a real stress because we don't want to expect more from the partners who are already stretched to the max in terms of their ability to respond to our housing and homeless crisis. So it's a real challenge.
Thank you. Rep. Lamford, then I'm going to move on because we really have got to look at this. It was important to sort of get some sense of how that language that we put out was being operationalized and hear from at least one area of the state, but we've got a lot of territory to cover. So one question, and then I'm going to move back to the.
Thank you, Senator. And I think probably in the same camp as Pro Tem Senator Baruch. I don't think that the state is not trying. I do. I know that you're trying and everybody's working so hard. And when we look at these numbers and we stopped our BAA discussion in order to have this meeting, because we're very, very concerned that what is occurring in reality out there is, and what we have put into place, we edict a year ago about all hands on deck. It's not enough. It's not getting the job done. It's not because you're not trying. It's not enough. The numbers are not there to actually have the transition that we're not going to have an enormous amount of Vermonters very shortly in another crisis. And we're very concerned and we're looking to you to provide us with some direction forward with that. Thank you.
And so I'm going to turn it back. Obviously, when we're doing the BAA, you have a chart here of the number of people that would be coming in under adverse weather, which is a very open door eligibility, and historically has been put in place because actually a few years ago the House moved to eliminate it. That's the irony of this discussion. So adverse weather, and then we know that there are people that would not be eligible under the normal GA rules that are really designed to address households where the risk is the greatest, and that gets into age and families with children and so forth. So the adverse weather is very helpful, but we know that when adverse weather is, you don't worry about whether you meet the category vulnerable, you're just in the door. So this is going to have an impact as it relates to when that policy, when that benefit ends. So why don't you take it from here, knowing our need to say, what are those kind of backup and contingency as it relates to the population that we are seeing that are either in that June cohort or meet the definition of vulnerable, which I think is of concern here.
And to be sort of frank about it, Stu was doing all of these things before we had an all hands on deck approach. And I imagine other field services directors were too. And so what
difference here?
It's different.
And
can we, like, what is the renewed urgency and the renewed plan to
Certainly, I feel like they're,
country is facing?
yeah.
and the extent to which we would want that from the agency, but how are those community organizations stepping up? How are our healthcare providers stepping up? Because this is obviously a population at risk. Are we really seeing something very affirmative as opposed to historically, we've sort of looked, it's a DCF problem. And that is absolutely not true. It's much, much greater than simply processing, the benefits. So that's what we're trying to get is there a shared urgency around what is, how we're going to really address this population?
So I think there are two questions there, and I want to make sure to give Devin Smith-McRae and also joining us as acting director of the Office of Economic Opportunity at DCF, Lily Sojourner, a chance to speak to some of that. But what I heard there, just to clarify, there's a question from the pro tem and others around sort of what's the plan, where are we going, how will we respond to this need? And a related plan, where is the level of urgency? What is the community response looking like? And I think I want to respond to the second one first before handing it to Miranda to give a sense of scope and scale and respond a little bit to Representative Harrison's question with more clarity, and to Lily as well. In response, it is true that a lot of what Sue described is what we were doing. However, we did take additional steps within that space. Also within the act was a request that we move forward with more case and panel management. We have done a lot more outreach. We've been able to screen everyone in the cohort and almost everyone, I believe, at this point who has come in through GA within a relatively near amount of time because of the adverse weather conditions. That population moves quite quickly. That screening tool enables us, by looking at the data, to determine what are the underlying conditions. We're looking at where do we need to move to create the level of beds that we would need to transition folks. And I believe there's a slide in the deck towards the back that sort of talks about at least what our system capacity looks like. It's not quite that one, but it's called residential capacity. And I think what's important there is, again, what we run up against over and over again, even when we get the data, even when we get the engagement with healthcare providers, with our skilled nursing staff, et cetera, we run into an absence of actual spaces to move actual humans. So with that, and it is not an answer that I imagine is completely the response you were looking for, but we do hear urgency. I mean, candidly, I had several meetings with one of the major healthcare providers where they're offering locations where we could look at mobile shelter sites, where we could look at co-locating facilities. Those are all long-term projects, but they are engaged with us hand in glove. And we look to other providers, whether they're smaller, local FQHCs and other folks. And of course, we rely on the network of providers across the board. And that, not to get on too much of a soapbox, that's a workforce issue as well. Those folks are overworked as it stands. Our staff are stretched. So without getting into that, I want to turn to Miranda, give us a little context on where the population currently is compared to last year in the overall program and where things are moving.
Sure, happy to do so. For the record, Miranda Gray, Deputy Commissioner of the Economic Services Division. Representative Harrison, you had asked where were we a year ago, and we were housing over 1,800 households at that time. So we were housing more households, and some of the reasons for serving less is that we lost some capacity during the flood. We also had some hotels who decided to no longer work with us over the summer. So that is why we are truly limited by how many rooms we have available. And I will just acknowledge, because I'm sure someone will ask, there are also other motels where I have to put a cap. I'm not able to use all of their rooms, and that is most of the time it has been a communication with the local municipalities to make sure that I'm not over extending their service capabilities. Where we are now is that we do have just over 500 households who are in the cohort. And then I have over 980 households who are housed under adverse weather conditions. So adverse weather conditions, those end, the date to date is March 15th. So typically last year, that was extended until June 1st. And so at that time, I had over 800 individuals who were exited from the program. So that happened. And then we had decided through legislation to continue housing, and that is how we got the June cohort, which was over 1,200 households. Those that I'm housing now, I think Senator Kitchell had mentioned that we know that some people don't meet any other eligibility criteria, and that is true. So I have been looking, and I have about just over 300 households who are housed purely because they are saying, I have nowhere to stay tonight and it is cold. And so that is the program that we are running right now. and they would traditionally, or as is planned, they would not be eligible for housing as of March 15th.
And that's been in place for a long time.
For a very long time.
Just for people who are familiar with the rules, that weather policy has been around, I don't know how long. So it's not new. It's not associated with any of the COVID related issues.
And I appreciate that. And, you know, I know 10 years ago, when the cold weather exception would end for the year, you'd see 3 or 4 people on the streets of Brattleboro with a tent or a sleeping bag. We're talking about a totally different scale at the end of the cold weather exception than I think we were when, you know, historically, having nothing to do, you know, partly having to do with pandemic, but partly other economic factors.
Correct. And I should mention, then we will go to a night to night. So it will be weather dependent. So from March 15th until April 15th, if weather conditions make it so that someone needs housing, then we will house people. So we're a little bit in flux at that time, but that is potentially a population that some people, we do know that we have some Vermonters who only come to see us during adverse weather conditions. They're looking for housing during that period of time, and then they choose to not engage with any of our other services, which is their right to do. We also have just under 200 households who are working with us through one of our eligibility categories right now, and that is where they're limited to their 20 or 84 days. And that is the others that are in the adverse weather conditions are those that have already used for 20 or 84 days and now are only eligible to be housed under adverse weather conditions. I think I'm happy to take any questions that you might have, but I think you were wanting to know what have we done, and that is where Lily is able to speak about some of the projects that we are.
That would be very helpful. Why don't
Excuse me. Hi, for the record, Lily Sojourner, Interim Director of the Office of Economic Opportunity. I'm able to share a little bit about the ways that we've been able to increase emergency shelter capacity. You know, we started doing this report over the summer. I was trying to search through my email to see where we were with shelter capacity over the summer, but I found a report from October 20th in which we had just 428 household capacity. So currently we are at 548. So that's an increase of over 120 since that time. And we hope that by the end of the fiscal year, we'll be at 587. And the administration's budget includes base funding for the Housing Opportunity Grant Program, which is a main source of funding for emergency shelters in Vermont, to sustain roughly 80 plus shelter beds or capacity for 80 households in state fiscal year 25. So we were able to grow a lot of the shelter capacity with one-time funding. We want to make sure we continue that capacity into the next state fiscal year. We also have part of that funding for an additional capacity for roughly 100 households. So that's work that we're doing. This does include part of the 587, include some of the capacity that Rob mentioned in terms of some of these one-time projects, such as the project with Winston Prouty Center down in Brattleboro. They have other future visions for that site. It's a great resource where we can leverage funding, provide a need right now, and help Winston Prouty as they move toward their long-term vision. Capstone Community Action in Central Vermont is also working with us to increase some of their emergency apartment shelter capacity. So that will be available March and April through state fiscal year 25. And then we continue to explore other more short-term options to help with this GA transition as well. I don't know if you want me to-
Senator Brewer?
Thank you, and I suppose this would go back to the deputy commissioner. But what I'm for the deputy secretary, what I'm concerned with is, and I'm thinking here about the presentations we've had in appropriations from Commissioner Winters and among others. So the money that was being requested by the administration to deal with the remaining members of the cohort and the enhanced other groups was clearly inadequate to meet the need. So the number of shelter beds that were being talked about as a, an ideal outcome of what was on the table was about half of the remaining households in the June cohort. And I asked at that time why there wasn't a request for more funding. I have to believe that increased funding could overcome some of the obstacles that we're talking about. We might be able to bring more shelters online. But that was in line with what we heard about the Waterbury project, the Armory, was that it was going to be fitted up as a shelter and then it was going to be turned to other uses come the end of the fiscal year. So it would be online for 3 or 4 months, and then it was going to be taken offline as a shelter. I found that alarming because of the kind of implied contradiction. We're trying desperately to bring shelter beds online, but at the same time, the administration is not seemingly committed to providing the funding necessary, or in the case of the Waterbury shelter, thinking of it as a more long-term solution. So I'm wondering if you can address that sense, the contradictory sense that on the one hand, there's an implied limit to the money that the administration is willing to spend. And for a project like Waterbury, a stop date that doesn't seem to make sense with the needs that we're talking about. I feel as though we could make more progress. Let's just take the June cohort. If the administration were more committed, not just to the process things that are already in place, but to spending more of the money that it is saving since we brought down the number of the whole June. And then maybe you could address the Waterbury issue as well.
And as part of that, obviously, one of the things that we have, it's controversial, and that has to do with the continued need for motel rooms after July 1st. That's part of your strategy, because it's going to have to be part of it as well, since all the equivalent alternatives are not going to be online at that point. So I assume that's going to be part of the path forward as well.
Yes, Senator. And so I think in a vacuum, without other budget pressures, I would agree that we could put more money forward to increase shelter capacity in lots of different ways. Certainly the Office of Economic Opportunity has tremendous goals in that space, and we continue to support those in an incremental fashion. But at base, the challenge is that we have to prioritize across the entire budget. And that's what the administration has done with the monies that they have put forward, and the governor's recommendation identifies that. So while we at AHS, I will avoid making a joke about how much money AHS spends on the state as a whole, but would say we certainly are responsible for a significant portion of how Vermonters view the quality of their society through the budget priorities we make as a state. That said, there are, of course, other broader priorities. And when Secretary Curley is here speaking about capacity and unit generation, that's another competing but related priority that speaks to the fundamental challenges we face. So essentially what I would say, Senator, is it is a matter of prioritization within the budget. We are looking to respond to the needs as urgently as we can, while at the same time investing in the longer term goals to support Vermonters across an entire spectrum. If we overextend ourselves in certain areas, we will put in jeopardy broader swaths of our society and our social safety net. We as an agency have to make those challenging determinations, and this is one.
And I understand what you're saying, which is that the governor decides these things with his budget and he has to make decisions across the board. I would say,
as do we as an agency, I would say we also prioritize within that space.
sure.
And
So
frankly,
he sets-
we do too.
Yeah. But Act 81, he signed, and Act 81 was an attempt to take the June cohort all the way through finding shelter, and it guaranteed that to them to a date that we had put out into this year. So it was disappointing to me to have the agency come back and say, our plan, such as it is, covers half of the remaining folks. We're not going to pay for any more, and we're not going to plan for the rest of them past that date. That seems to me a failure on everyone's part, on the General Assembly's part. But it also seems that the governor should be prioritizing a law that he signed into being, and with it, that commitment to those folks. Now, understanding that there was a termination date for it, but it was always my intention, and I believe others, that if we were unsuccessful in moving all of those households into appropriate shelter, we would come back and keep trying until we made it. So I give you all kudos for getting to 527 households, but it is, it's a failure in planning and governance if we get to the end date and the administration's response is just, sorry, 260 of you will now go on the street. Clearly, the legislature is not going to let that happen, but I don't think it should be offloaded onto us to do all that heavy lifting.
Understood. And I may use that moment, recognizing the time, unless there are other questions on that, to at least, because a related element here is the nature of what we pay hotels. That is, I wouldn't call it the elephant in the room, but one of the biggest budget pressures and challenges within this space. And of course, if we can buy down how much each room costs per night, we can extend how many rooms we can make available. And I know that's an issue of concern to this committee. So what I will say in that space, first, candidly, this is a negotiation undertaken across state government, principally through the agency of administration. It is an active negotiation, so I'm not going to give hard and fast details, but I'll provide those details that I think I can in this time and space. It has been largely successful to date. A majority of the hotels that take part in the program, of the 78 hotels, have indicated that they will accept an $80 per night room rate with some additional elements to the contract in terms of protecting property and ensuring some security value, a damage waiver, I guess you'd call it. And that the March 1st deadline is working to advance that. We've had tremendous success with a number of specific hotel owners. Anil Sachdev has been a tremendous partner in this and moving a lot of folks. That said, there's still a good quantity of rooms, upwards of 400 rooms, that are potentially not going to remain in the program as of March 1st. Our understanding is a lot of those folks are waiting to see what this body and the conference committee will do. To put it maybe too informally, they're waiting to see if we will blink. And I don't believe that it is certainly not the governor's intent to move that cap. It is certainly not my understanding of the legislature's intent to move that cap. $80 a night does seem to be working. Beyond that, we recognize that it is unlikely 100% of the hotels will stay in the program. That happens, as Miranda indicated, every year. We have some measure of movement. We have some measure of shifting individuals. We see that as potentially occurring in the coming few days and weeks, as one hotel may say, no, we will not accept this rate. And we will work to move those individuals to another hotel that may have additional capacity. It does mean a disruption for those households. I don't want to sugarcoat that, but I do want to say it is absolutely our goal to ensure that in some manner, every household will continue to be sheltered through this program or ancillary emergency program.
Okay, I think we need to condition everyone will. As I said earlier on, we are not able to shelter everyone now. And in fact, we know that there are individuals, single individuals, who are coming in and getting a room. And we might be saying to a family or to someone whose circumstances put them at great health risk because of their age or a disability, don't get it because there's limited capacity. So I just want to
Thank you, sir.
Condition your statement around everyone relative to maybe who's here, except for the right-hand side, depending on, the committee of conference. So I think that we need to be clear. We are not sheltering everyone now.
We never have.
And we never have. We're just talking about particularly the June cohort, which was the topic and timeframe. So Senator Sears.
What's the dollar amount of 3 new projects for you expanded emergency shelter, day shelter, street outreach expansion by DMH, which, by the way, I don't know what good that does, but that's 0 beds available.
So Senator, you're looking at slide 7.
I'm looking at new projects in the community.
Yeah,
that you
slide
had
7.
up there.
Slide 7.
I'm asking what the total dollar amount is.
Yeah.
of the three different,
Yeah,
Like-
so, sure. So also if you look at slide 5, that breaks down some of these one-time costs. So for instance, the street
I
outreach,
want,
DMH expansion
you're
is,
not gonna tell me what the cost of, expanded is?
oh,
What
so,
the cost of day shelter capacity is, street outreach expansion, that's all I want to know.
yeah, so the street outreach expansion, I'm just saying they line up. So the 1.5 million homelessness outreach and support, that's the street outreach expansion.
So we have to look at 5 and 7 together then. It's
Well, I'm
5.
trying to find out what
And
you're putting into expanded emergency shelter capacity, the new and expanded, that seems to be the big item.
yeah, and I think
And the
what,
day shelter is all messed up over Waterbury and what you're doing, I can't figure out what the heck you're doing, but with your day shelter, it just doesn't make,
Well, day shelter isn't,
well, they're gonna open it, we're almost into March 1st.
but.
They're gonna open it and close it.
Oh, but that's not on here. I don't see water.
No, I know, but I'm talking about the new and expanded. What is the dollar amount? FY 25, FY 26.
I don't know if you broke it out that way.
yeah, I may have to get back to you for the exact amount for this slide because
Joint
some of
fiscal,
this,
I would think we know exactly what the numbers are.
yeah, I think that the challenge is that we have, so we have approximately 18 million in homeless assistance funding for the Housing Opportunity Grant Program. We had about 7 million in one-time funds that came to the Office of Economic Opportunity. 5 million of those just came to the Office of Economic Opportunity. 10 million is what's broken down on slide 5. And the
That's
2.6
fine. You don't have to
million.
answer. Madam Chair,
I think
to
we're,
not be prepared for a joint fiscal committee to ask about the cost of a particular item that they're presenting
maybe.
is troubling to me.
And I think it probably is very helpful to see what the distribution of the
Yeah,
funds across.
I'd
those
like to know
initiatives.
what the new expanded
But
is.
maybe,
Get that today.
you can.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just a combination of base funding and the one-time funds. And so that shouldn't be a problem. We just don't have that math exactly today, and I apologize for that.
But you can provide it, I'm sure.
Yes, absolutely.
We'll be looking at that. Separately.
So I appreciate the breakout on slide 5 of the $10 million. I guess my concern is that there's a number of these things that are really ongoing, and that's one-time dollars. Is it my assumption correct that that's one-time dollars? Or is that 10 million part of the ongoing?
This is, as it's broken down by activity on slide 5, it's the one time. If you look at the shelter line item, the shelter expansion line item, the 2.6. This is where there are 5 projects that are funded right now through the one-time funds, either through 10 million or the 5 million that we are continuing with the administration's commitment of the 7 million in base funding. So those projects are seasonal shelter capacity in Montpelier, a year-round shelter in St. Johnsbury, young adult emergency apartments in Brattleboro, preservation of the Champlain Inn in Burlington, and a conversion of youth shelter in Burlington from seasonal to year-round.
Okay, so you answered my question. So the things that you have developed with one-time funds, the administration has included in the ongoing base budget for FY 25.
For those shelter projects.
For those-
Are there
There are
other-
some projects, so for instance, there is the city of Burlington's project at the former VFW, which is no longer gonna be, they have other development plans as of April 1st. So that was a very one-time project, between the Office of Economic Opportunity and the city of Burlington. We all knew this capacity. So that is not included.
Right. Are there any other shelters or services that you would consider to be ongoing in nature that are continue to only be funded in one-time dollars in the 25 budget?
I think the biggest source of one-time funding that is not continued in the state fiscal year 25 budget is the direct client financial assistance. So that's things like security deposits, rental assistance, help with moving, or utility bills that people could access through their housing opportunity grant program fund administrator in each community. For the past several years, that has received significant one-time funding through coronavirus relief funds or one-time appropriations. So that is, I think, the most significant chunk of the one-time money through OEO that is not funded in state fiscal year 25.
Thank you.
And then if we were to go down to temporary shelters for GA transition, that 2.3, is that, for example,
That's the
some of the ones like in St. Johnsbury, for example, or
That's the Winston Prouty
Crowley, okay.
shelter that Sue Graff talked about. So again, very much a one-time project. They don't have the capacity or interest to extend it either. These emergency apartments through Capstone Community Action, which again are just one-time leases. They're able to leverage existing staff to create some of this capacity. And then the other things that have been mentioned, such as Waterbury Armory or mobile shelters that we've been discussing, would be part of that line item and not part of the 7 million in the ongoing budget.
I think we're getting into really a 25 budget discussion around what we've been able to set up, what is one time, what are the one times that in fact are going to translate into an ongoing cost, and how the extent to which the governor's recommended budget funds those activities. Whether we're talking about a continuation of the $80 a day for some populations, or the funding of the leases that you're proposing, that you would be negotiating, and the extent to which the recommended, and those of us who are working on the budget, anyone sitting in the room knows how difficult your FY25 budget was. I don't want anyone to think that this is an easy choice in terms of how you had to prioritize. Where those of us on appropriations know that the money here is, and what is in 25 really needs to be looked at very carefully, because the money, this isn't the only spending pressure, and this isn't the only population that we're trying to address and serve through the budget process. But I think we're just trying to get a better sense of, in the 25, what is being proposed, what is in the base relative to what is identified as an ongoing need. And so I know that the Appropriations Committee, and I think that gets to Senator Sears' concern, is how does that look like, and what is the adequacy there? Representative Corner.
I like how we're all senators for this meeting.
Well, because
Somewhat to follow up on Senator Baruth's question about sort of urgency and a shift in planning. Well, you've been sort of with OEO for quite a while, and I think you've been able to sort of follow some of the churn of shelter over those years. And I don't know if you don't answer this today, that's okay. But I'm curious, when I know that in the communities that I pay attention to, there is standard every few years churn in where emergency shelters are, emergency shelters closing, opening, new permanent shelters opening. And I'm curious how different you see the sort of development that we see in this chart from maybe the development that we would have seen 4 years ago, and how much, if we've really been able to increase capacity in a significant way in these last 2 years compared to the kind of capacity we increased and lost in the past.
Yeah, I think one of the trends that we're seeing is that we have lost a significant amount of the seasonal bed nights that we used to have. So these would be emergency shelters that might be open, for instance, like November 15th to April 15th, kind of mirroring the adverse weather conditions. A lot of these, if folks aren't familiar, might, and if you imagine like a church dining hall, cots, a lot of volunteers, from that faith community or from the community. And that used to be, and I can follow up with the specific numbers, but that used to be a significant portion of our annual bed nights. And that would really help during the cold weather months, give this increased capacity. And with the COVID pandemic, we've just seen that model not rebound. I also think that's related to the kind of complex needs that we're seeing among this population, where just having an informal space with majority volunteers, when you're trying to think about like COVID mitigation, as well as the potential for having people responding to overdoses, like it's just not something that shelters are seeing that they can respond with volunteers on. And so that is a huge shift for us. And we actually this year are back to the number of bed nights that we were pre-pandemic, but it's a very big shift from like no longer that seasonal capacity and instead building up more year-round capacity. This year, we really only have 2 seasonal shelters that are purely seasonal.
So am I hearing you right that in some ways the number of beds we have available is sort of similar to the baseline of number of beds we would have had available 5 years ago, even though they're different beds?
The bed nights is, and I can follow up with a more detailed slide, that we're back to kind of pre-pandemic bed night level. And again, it's because we had a significant amount of bed nights during the winter for a few months, and we're just not seeing that. I mean, we used to have multiple seasonal shelters operating across the state for 3 to 4 months.
Remember, we put a shower into the local.
Right, they were just, not open during the day. They were open just overnight, not providing meals or any kind of services. And so we're just not seeing that. So that has been a trend over the past few years.
And I understand that's a profoundly unideal way for anyone to be sleeping. And I'm not suggesting that we should open more of those. I'm just trying to get a sense of, are we actually making progress or not? And what does progress look like? Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I can follow up again with some of the bed night numbers that we have, so you can see the impact of the pandemic where they dropped significantly and then the growth to get back to where we used to be.
Thank you. I'm just looking at the clock and we haven't, well, first of all, we haven't had Alex Farrell come up, and then we still want to hear from the provider community partners. And so Alex, want to come up and just briefly in terms of how we're doing on the capacity of permanent housing capacity, and then I'm going to move on to the provider and community that obviously are seeing the needs and are advocating for those needs in this process. So thank you. Sorry, time is of the essence here.
Oh, that's all right. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll try to be quick because I understand you're paid on time. So what I've tried to do today is delineate between what I believe the focus is the acute problem we're facing right now. We understand that there's this broader problem, and Rep Wood, just to quickly address your question from earlier, if we're right and our assumptions are correct that the proposals from the beginning of the year would result in 4,000 to 5,000 units per year, we'd estimate 300 to 500 would be set aside for homelessness based on VHIP capacity that we proposed and ongoing VHCV production. But now to focus more acutely on the programs that we developed to try to more quickly address homelessness. Starting in 2020, we launched VHIP, which is a little bit more rapid response, in that these units come online in 6 to 8 months at a time at a cost of $38,400 is the average right now per unit. So
Recommending moving that up. Is that correct?
well, so we wouldn't be recommending moving the total cap up. What we would do is we would keep the cap as it exists at 50,000, with most of them being at 30,000 for 0 to 2 bedrooms. The proposed cap to 70,000 would be specifically for commercial conversion. So taking commercial space, converting it into residential and creating new units. And so we would expect that the average would stay roughly the same as it did after we moved from the original cap of 30.
A lot of second story above businesses that are potential. Is that what you're?
That's exactly right, Madam Chair. That's what we're going after, trying to repurpose that space to maximize the use of our built environment. So what I've thrown up here, and we can move quickly through this, but just to talk about the funding that's gone towards VHIP and MER, and I'll tell you why they're relevant. But $25 million from VHIP so far has been obligated, and then we have started to spend down the 20 million of the state general funds. Obviously, we had to prioritize CRF and ARPA. So why don't we go down to the more specific items here in VHIP? So I'm not going to go through the program guidelines. You're aware of that. 535 units is what we've produced so far. So probably pertinent to today, we have roughly 18 million remaining of the existing 20 million in state general funds. We'd estimate that that would produce at least 375 additional units. With the $6 million proposed in the governor's budget for VHIP, we'd estimate that that would bring online another 125 to 130 units. I'll note that to date, VHIP has been exclusively the 5-year covenant, which is the homeless set aside. VHIP 2.0, which launches in a few weeks, is going to include a 10-year covenant in which people do not have to specifically rehouse somebody off coordinated entry. They can, but it requires HUD fair market rents. We do not. Oh, sure.
So I guess I'm just curious about that policy change, and one, whether that requires legislative approval or not, or if it's just in the program guidelines. And how then do you think that will impact? You had said previously that there had been a large number of people who had offered the coordinated entry into VHIP, and it seems like extending that to the 10-year without that requirement is going to reduce the availability to people who are in coordinated entry, which seems like the opposite of what we want to do.
So to clarify, VHIP in statute was actually designed with the 10-year option. We just haven't been offering it. So we are now going to offer what the legislature drew up for the program. We would estimate still a significant, far more than half would opt for the 5-year option. We don't have data to confirm, but even when we were running it with CRF dollars, which didn't have the original program design, a substantial number of folks were still coming off of coordinated entry. So we'd estimate that 60 to 80% will still come from coordinated entry. So that would still be 250, 300 units, perhaps more, homeless set aside from that 18 and 6 million.
Thank you, I guess.
I was just gonna ask, when you say the 375 units with using the 18 million that you currently have, by when? What is
12 months.
12 and 12
So
months?
March 2025 is what we expect.
And then the 125 to 30 units, if we should be able to
That's the
put
other
together
6
the
million.
6 million
Between March and July 25.
next year. Okay.
Yes.
So what was that total number?
So that'd be a little over 500 units by July of 2025. I keep speaking into this thinking it's your mic. It's not.
I know everyone's.
I know.
All right.
Questions, otherwise we'll keep going.
Thank you, ma'am.
I'm just looking.
And of that, between 60 and 80% would go to unhoused people.
That's an estimate. There's nothing in program guidelines to dictate that, but that's what I would project right now.
Representative Corn.
And that number, did you decide on that number by working backwards from need or forwards from capacity?
The 6 million.
It's just like we're making a bite in the problem, which is sort of seems to be a state of Vermont and legislative theme that I think makes it really hard for us to do the kind of planning we need to do to make a difference for Vermonters.
The 6 million was projection of need, in part because we know we don't have base funding. We wanted to make sure we could get the program going through the following legislative session so that we could determine outcomes. And then if we need to come back and adjust, we know we'd at least get to July 25.
Can you answer that question a different way?
Yes,
Thanks.
yes, it was based on need.
Do you think it fulfills the need?
Not the entire need for the homeless population, the need to get the program through to July of 25.
Just based on how much
The spend down rate.
that you can administer within that period of time.
So
Yeah.
capacity, not need.
Yeah, that's probably a better way to put it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Otherwise, we're going to keep going because I would like to at least have some time. We've got three witnesses here.
And just an important, let's go back real quick to VHIP. An important number that wasn't mentioned is not even touching the 18 million or the 6 million. There's already an additional 386 units that are currently underway that are in the pipeline being developed from that original batch of money. So that's another 386 units just dedicated to homelessness.
And they're underway right now.
That's right. Okay, so we can jump over to Mark. I'll move a little more quickly through manufactured home improvement and repair. This is more focused on stemming the tide of newly homeless households because oftentimes these are geared towards households that are precariously housed, specifically the home repair. So you can see that the 118 applications approved for home repair. These are coming in at a very low cost per grant. So these are keeping people housed for a number of years while we can find, or they can find more long-term solution either through the homeownership centers with loans to get a new unit, or while we work on the parks through the same program. You can see of the original 4 million that was initially allocated, demand immediately went through that. So 5.6 million was demand just through December of 23. We have a total of 8 million is what's been appropriated. And so of that 5.6 million in applications just March through December of 23, we expect that the total of 8 million will be expended certainly within this calendar year, likely within this fiscal year. So why don't I?
More preventive as opposed to adding.
That's right, Madam Chair. That's the focus is preventative. So I can pause there because I did want today to be focused on the specific programmatic investments and the numbers for the acute problem. I'll make mention of Representative Wood referenced the numbers for the broader proposals. The part of the justification there is to take some of the pressure off the perpetually affordable portfolio right now. There's a lot of pressure on that portfolio. It is also a significant source. I know you all see the Act 81 report from VHCB, so I won't rehash data from that, but 41%, so let's see, a little over 200 in the last year were rehoused from coordinated entry into the existing portfolio, not the new homeless set-asides. And so taking pressure off of that system is another benefit of the unit expansion and the programmatic investments proposed. But I can pause there to take questions.
I think we're going to probably have to move on because it's 17 minutes after 1 and we have other committees that are going to be starting.
I just want to make a comment on that last thing. I just have to say, I'm not sure we want to take pressure off. That's sort of the whole point is to house more people who are homeless. And so, recognize that we need to do that within existing portfolio, new portfolio, and an expansion in the building. So,
well, I think the number of perpetually affordable units would continue to increase. It's do they have the ability to house all of them? This would be giving them the ability. And so folks can move up out of perpetually affordable, knowing that net is always there. Right now, we're not giving those people an opportunity. We want to give them more of a chance.
Thank you. First. I'm sorry, we're pressed for time. I'm going to ask that the provider community come up as a group if you could. Also, we really want to have your update in terms of what you see is happening within that on the community side and with the partners relative to communities' receptivity to hosting housing that is really needing to be developed. We have lots of emails in terms of the need or, how we could liberalize or whatever. But what we wanted to do today is just give us a sense. And, are there certain areas of the state? If we look at the number in Rutland, how are we doing in Rutland? What is underway? How is the community around, how are communities around the state responding? Because that obviously is one of the foundational pieces of addressing the situation that we're experiencing. So we would really like to have that perspective as it relates to that sense of how you see all those hands that need to come on deck working in addressing what is something that is a very significant. It's not going to be something we solve between now and July. And we've seen numbers around housing. I mean, $2 billion. Well, that's the entire state budget for 1 year. So it's much larger than state government as it relates to, other entities, whether we're talking about, the how we incent housing development. And so it's within that context. We'd like to have you share your experiences of what it looks like relative to that effort with your feet on the ground. So appreciate it. I see Paul Dragon is there remotely, so he's looking over your shoulder. Okay. All right, so if you want to start, I don't know who wants to take the lead on this, but.
Affordable housing necessarily.
Okay, do you want to start, Paul, or do you want?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Senator Kitchell. Thank you, Honorable Chair, Vice Chair, members of the Joint Fiscal Committee. Appreciate being here. I know we're pressed for time. I did submit testimony. I recently updated it. I will work from the updated copy, and thanks to Erin for managing me so well. I was asked, and I prepared my comments on a response, the progress and the response from Act 78, and then to look at any challenges and opportunities kind of going forward. So you're going to see a long document there with immediate, short-term, midterm, and long-term needs. For the record, my name is Paul Dragon. I'm the Executive Director of the Champlain Valley Office of Economic Opportunity, also called CVOEO. We have 10 interrelated programs. We provide emergency services like housing, food, warmth, shelter, and we also work really hard to get people into economic independence, micro business, weatherization, Head Start, personal financing. We served 21,000 people last year. We're a member of the Vermont Community Action Partnership, 5 community action agencies working, together on anti-poverty efforts. So one of the questions was resources, and coming out of last year. So it's my understanding, and I was following my state colleagues very closely, that there was just over 18 million last year for homeless assistance, with an additional 7 million in one-time funds, bringing the total to a little over 26 million. This year's proposal, the way I understand it, is to keep the 7 million from last year and utilize it for additional shelter capacity. We appreciate the governor's recommended funding for additional shelter capacity. However, at the same time, we are very concerned that this comes at the expense of much of the one-time funding from last year, which Lily had mentioned, including the financial assistance provided by the Housing Opportunity Program, or the HOP program. We have an immediate request that we bring back that HOP financial assistance, because it's critical to get people into housing and to keep them in housing. That has been a critical resource for us. So we added shelter capacity, but we took it from a really critical resource, and I would love the committee to be aware of that. I want to talk a little bit, and Senator Kitchell, you mentioned our community response. I can talk to CVOEO. I think it relates a bit to other communities around the state. In the past 3 years, we stepped up to manage 2 large emergency shelters because the previous organizations could no longer run them. And I think this goes to Representative Kornheiser's point a little bit before. They could no longer run the emergency shelters because they are complex, financially uncertain, and at times high risk, making it difficult to hire and to retain staff. It's even more difficult, and this is maybe why we're not gaining the capacity, when there isn't adequate or any cost of living increases, or when funding is promised in 1-year increments. And I've got a couple of examples, I think important examples for that. When we took over the Champlain Inn, we were told that, it would be 1 year, one-time funding. That's fine. We knew what we were getting into. We could not use that community resource. The other organization could no longer run it. We had a vision, and we got increased funding thanks to our colleagues at the Office of Economic Opportunity to transition that to from a mass shelter to 1 and 2 rooms. And that's been really successful. We also keep it open 24/7. It's not just a nighttime shelter. There were so many complaints with people lining up every day from the community and since we've made this transition and started on October 1st, we have not had one community complaint. And I understand that the Champlain Inn, as Lily said, is now in the, it's in this 7 million funding, and we do appreciate that. I definitely want to see what the specifics are. But it is really difficult when we have to go into something where we're not sure if we're going to get additional funding. So we had to hire, and this is not an isolated incident. You have to understand this. We had to hire staff telling them they can only be assured of 12 months of work, if that. It's very difficult to hire staff under those circumstances. So we currently serve 5 guests at the Champlain Inn who are paranoid schizophrenics. And there's a woman in a wheelchair, there's many other with severe disabilities. We also have several people that are working there that can't afford another place to live. So what we're seeing is that we're telling our team to come in with 1-year funding, and we don't really get cost of living increases, and they are seeing an incredibly complex population with medical, mental health, substance use, intellectual disabilities, and developmental disabilities. 3 years ago, we started the Community Resource Center in Burlington. It's one of the most active places in the state for people experiencing homelessness. It's temporarily funded. It's been on a year-to-year basis. At the CRC, we see about 112 guests on average every day. One day last year, we had 189 guests. We provide all sorts of services there. Through October, 247 people using the CRC reported being unsheltered. This is just in the Burlington area. They are an aging population, and it's critical for us to understand this. 14% of the guests are between the ages of 55 and 62, and another 14% of the guests are over the age of 62 living unsheltered. 53% of the guests have a medical condition and/or disability, which is likely underreported. We have been calling emergency services at the Community Resource Center, which is funded year to year, and our staff know that. We call emergency services 3 to 5 times every single week, just to tell you what we're facing in terms of the complexity of our work.
I don't know how much longer. You have 2 colleagues here at the end of the table, and we're down to about 5 minutes.
Okay.
So if you can, you've obviously given us a detailed response here that we have. So I hate to cut you short, but I don't want to not have an opportunity for the other 2 witnesses.
Okay.
So I think what you're saying is the complexity of the population that you're seeing and the support services they need. I guess it's also getting back to the other service agencies that are funded as well. Whether we're talking about mental health, we're talking about what happens through maybe our area agencies on aging and the extent to which they are serving and the other is just the need for predictability and funding so that staff can feel some confidence that they have a job beyond, say, 12 months.
And our immediate ask is to ensure the interim housing through June 30th for all households on the General Assistance Emergency Housing Program, regardless of their cohort. We are seeing an incredible amount of people with disabilities living unsheltered. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll turn it over. I don't know which witness wants to start first, Julie?
Sure. For the record, my name is Julie Bond. I'm the co-executive director of Good Samaritan Haven, which is a homeless shelter network serving Washington County, in particular in the central Vermont region. I also have extensive prepared statement there, so you can review that. Just to summarize some of the points, we operate 4 shelter facilities within central Vermont with 82 beds, emergency beds. There's overall 108 emergency beds with, 27 provided by a number of other community organizations within this county. There's roughly a county need of, as of July, 386 individuals that would need emergency shelters if the motel program completely goes away. So, yes, more emergency shelter options are needed. The motel program probably needs to be continued at some level to enable shelters to accomplish their own existing strategic developmental goals. Not a reactive response, but a proactive response that would span budgetary time frame. Our own top priorities as an organization for shelter options in Washington County are very low and low barrier shelters for the growing unsheltered population, very complex individuals that we serve, and emergency shelters for people who need support around their very often complex medical healthcare needs. We've learned, and, Paul has stated a lot of the same things that I would as well, that it's not easy to create dignified and effective emergency shelter programs. It's a very, very, very complex work. Very important work, but very, very challenging work. No matter what the number of shelter beds are that we capitalize, there will always be challenges operationalizing them, including a fleet of willing and capable operators, community resistance in terms of where they're sited, engagement of public safety partners in keeping the shelters and the individuals and the communities safe. We think DCFOEO has made a great faith effort to provide more shelter beds over the last year. We still face this crisis. So looking at a holistic strategy, it's a long game approach. This problem is not going away anytime soon. We've had people in our shelters for years. It's very difficult to move people through in terms of an emergency shelter bed model, right? That becomes a different type of scenario. That's housing in terms of what we're experiencing. So it's
Transitional isn't transitional at all.
no, we serve it in we serve the best we can to a very complex set of individuals. So that needs to span budget cycles. It needs to incorporate adequate and ongoing funding levels, enabling strategic shelter expansion, organizational administrative capacity to weather that expansion. We as an organization have grown over 400% since the pandemic started in order to rise to this need. My colleague, Rick DeAngelis, and I, we don't shy away from the challenges and trying to meet the need, yet to enable an organization to stay sustainable, healthy, and successful and safe. The base capacity of it in order to grow the number of beds here has to also grow, right? So that you can stay afloat. You can't do that safely. So that's an important thing to consider. Happy to take questions, but I think we're about statements that
You're not going to have a lot of
yeah. So,
and we also have written a summary as well.
thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Definitely. Thank you all, and I'll definitely not read what I have submitted to y'all, but my name is Frank Knack. I'm the Executive Director of the Housing and Homelessness Alliance of Vermont. For those of you not familiar with HHAV, we're a merger of the Vermont Affordable Housing Coalition and the Vermont Coalition to End Homelessness, two organizations that have been around for a long time that I think you all know. So I'll just focus on a few things. I think one piece that we heard earlier from the state was that the number, they were just talking about the June cohort, which is about 600 and something households. That is a small fraction of the total folks in the GA program right now. We're talking about 1,661 households currently housed in the GA program. And using the state's data of 1.6 times to get household to individual comparison, we're talking about 2,000, sorry, I have the numbers here, 2,257 people on the low end likely currently housed. And our providers, our shelter providers are panicking because we're facing a cliff and there are no places for folks to go. Some folks talk about, can you get cabs? Where can you get cabs to bring people to? There's no place to bring people. There's no services in place. And so if you look at the state's proposal this fiscal year, even if you maxed out the 5 shelters at 50 per shelter, That is leaving a gap of 2,007 Vermonters without a place to go. And that's just this fiscal year. If you look at the next fiscal year, there's the 100 in development, but then they ask for an additional 180 beds. Again, that's beds, not households. So you're still talking about a gap of over 2,000. So we're deeply concerned about that. And I think one of the things we haven't talked about as well is, we've heard a lot about the cost of this program. What we don't talk about are the costs of not addressing this. It's not, the problem doesn't go away. The costs don't go away. The costs just get picked up in other areas in our healthcare system, in our criminal legal system. Back in 2017, and this is looking at national data, but back in 2017, the National Low Income Housing Coalition put out a number at 35,000, the cost annually that government pay for chronically unhoused people because of the taking the criminal, using the criminal legal system as a solution. It's in our hospitals as a solution. We've had 3.5% annual inflation since that number came out, so substantially higher. And so, it's substantially cheaper to continue with the status quo of using the system we have in place. We're working with our partners on the ground right now to envision this is the numbers that we need to be at in Vermont. There's a statistic you can use at 51 per 10,000. That's the likely unhoused rate per on average. So we're talking about over 3,000 people in Vermont right now. And so we need to understand what that number needs to be, what the goal needs that we need to build out to, and then build out a system that is manageable, working with the providers to understand how fast can you build out, what is the capital you need, but also what are the staffing needs that you need, what are the services that you need. That's something we're working on right now, but we're nervous that until we understand that and what that looks like, that we need to be able to keep the status quo, because if we don't, we're going to face a cliff. People are going to so thank you.
Thank you. I think at this point, we're going to have to adjourn the meeting. There was one more thing on the agenda, and it was to add limited service positions, but considering the time, we had a request from Christine Hallquist to add it to the BAA, but that's not the appropriate vehicle. So what we're going to do is put that out as an expedited request. And so if you could please respond, the money's there, but it's the limited service positions that need to be created to carry out that work. So I just want to let you know, we're going to take that off the agenda. We will deal with the request through the expedited process. So stay tuned for that email from George Fiscal. And thank you both for coming. Let Rob Fish know he was on that we are expedite, which it will be. I think we can get a response back from committee members very quickly. So at that point, I'm going to adjourn the joint fiscal committee meeting.